attacking and versus being slightly too defensive. And I think New Zealand were not quite at their best, but were still very, very good in certainly in patches. Some good patience by the Pakistani batsmen, and it was I think the end of the day, Pakistan comes out slightly on top, but still a good bowling performance from the Kiwis.
Yeah, so much has been written and spoken about the New Zealand attack with Southee, Boult, Jameson. Just how does it rank in the all-time greats of New Zealand cricket, would you say?
Look, it's certainly the best that I can think of. I think it's easily New Zealand's best test attack. In terms of being able to play horses for courses. They've left out the spinner Satner, who had a winning part to play in the first test, and they leave him out. That's the kind of bowling attack that New Zealand's got at the moment, where you can actually leave out players that have big input. Brought in Matt Henry, who took a wicket, was a tough decision for a few other bowlers lined up behind him in terms of taking that spot. But Matt Henry is a wonderful all-out, full wheels, bowls quick, and does what the captain needs to him, to the bowler, and had a pretty good day. It's a very good bowling attack, and I think they'll be a little bit annoyed that they didn't bowl Pakistan out for slightly fewer.
The team as a whole are level on points, aren't they, with Australia in the ICC Test ranking? They're trying to make it into the Test Championship, and with the likes of Captain Kane Williamson as well leading the charge. What would it mean to New Zealand cricket, Ian, to reach the finals and be ranked the number one side in the world?
Well, currently ranked number one, and it's a position that just isn't sort of thought of to be possible. The side, I finished playing 10 years ago, so it's only gone from strength to strength since I finished, which is sort of the team that we had back then versus the team that there is now. A lot of those players are still the same players, so there's 10 years extra of experience on some of the players. Ross Taylor was still playing, Tim Southee was just was emerging, and as was Trent Boult and Kane Williamson. So there's a whole group of players that have been in this team and in this squad for 10 plus years, and it's probably the most experienced Test team that's been out on the park for New Zealand for some time, and by far the best team together that New Zealand's ever put out. It's wonderful to see them at the top of the rankings. It's almost unimaginable in terms of. A couple of years before I finished, New Zealand had almost written off Test matches as a format. Let's just focus on white ball cricket.
Yeah.
And here we are a wee while later. It's top of the table in the Test rankings. It's pretty cool.
It certainly is. Ian, great to chat with you. Have a great year. I'm sure we'll speak again live on Sports World. The former New Zealand fast bowler Ian O'Brien there speaking to us live on Sports World. And of course, we will keep you across South Africa, Sri Lanka and New Zealand, Pakistan on Sport today throughout the next few days on the BBC World Service. We'll stay with cricket though, because the third test between Australia and India will go ahead in Sydney next week, despite a spike in COVID-19 cases in New South Wales. There had been calls for the match to be played in Melbourne, where India levelled the series on Tuesday. A reduced capacity of 24,000 is planned at the SCG, although playing behind closed doors is an option if cases continue to rise. And the decision has divided opinion of our Stumped podcast of Charu Sharma, Alison Mitchell and Jim Maxwell.
I immediately feel confident because I've just had a COVID test in the last 24 hours and I'm negative. So we tick that box.
Great.
But how fearful are people about attending the test match? You've got this fear factor going around. I mean, when clusters keep breaking out, so they need to try and fence that in or have it controlled in the next few days leading up to the test match to give everyone the confidence of going to. I personally think that it was a premature decision by Cricket Australia. There was obviously a lot of political pressure coming from New South Wales between the government and the SCG Trust, Cricket New South Wales, Cricket Australia. They wanted to have the game for so many obvious reasons. And the worry is if things don't improve in terms of, as you say, biosecurity in the next few days, they may well have to play in front of an empty house. And it was significant, the words of Paul Kelly, Professor Paul Kelly, the Australian Chief Medical Officer, who said that acknowledging the fact that he's a cricket fan and he'd love to go. But he said, no way I would take my parents to the game because I don't think it's safe. Now, like Dr. Fauci in the United States, when the chief medical man says that, you've got to be worried about the safety of everyone who can attend. So watch this space, as they say. Things might change in the next few days.
I mean, some of the measures being taken, talking about staggering entrance and exit to the stadium to try and avoid queuing at turnstiles, for example, restricting movement between stands in the SCG and then banning people from certain postcodes, i.e. hotspot locations, from coming to the cricket. So there's some measures being put in place. Charu, if the Sydney Test match ends up being played behind closed doors, what does that say to you, that the decision was a right or a wrong one to insist on staging it there in the first place?
Well, Alison, I don't mean to sound more cavalier than the situation demands, but I do think that if the first couple of test matches have been able to be safe enough for the spectators particularly, I know the players are all okay in their biosphere, so they can play.
But they were staged in cities where there'd been no local transmission for 2 months.
Yes, but, the medical fraternity...
Adelaide, sorry, I beg your pardon. Adelaide was, a situation they brought under control.
I think the medical fraternity will certainly not be cavalier here. They'll be more than careful, and they will ensure that the fingers are not pointed in their direction saying, why did you allow this, knowing that there's an epidemic? So I do think that there's an excess concern for safety, which is perhaps the right thing to do. But, maybe closed doors is really just, it's going to take everything out of this test series. So perhaps there can be a via media. You mentioned some of the measures. And if it can be a very reduced number at the field, even that will give sufficient atmosphere. But to have just a closed doors test match, will rob the series of a great deal of just local flavor, and with local flavor comes, all the international attention as well when there are spectators in the field. So I'm obviously not there. I don't know what the severity of the situation in Sydney is, but I do think that if in Australia a fair measure of control can be exercised, then surely they can have perhaps 1/4 of the stadium with enough distancing between people to come and watch. It would be a shame, really, because so far there hasn't really been any sporting incident. So you can't claim that, the world of sport has taken enhanced this epidemic or pandemic. Maybe there should be a certain via media in the middle and have 1/4. And to me, that sounds fair for the moment.
I have to say that for having commentated on test matches behind closed doors across the English summer, it would feel that if that ends up being the case, then it would feel as if the Sydney Test has been a gamble that hasn't paid off, because it's a loss for the spectators who can't be there. It's a loss for the players who are playing in front of empty stands. It's a loss for the wider fans who will then be listening to radio commentary in echoey stadiums and watching on television without spectators, and it's then a poorer spectacle visually and to listen as well. So everybody loses out, it seems, except if the test ends up being played behind closed doors, except for the fact that, okay, you have a game. It's only the next best thing from it being abandoned, in my view. Let's cross fingers and hope that everything can stay safe.
Yes, wise words from Alison there. Plenty more from Alison and the Stumped team on our weekly cricket podcast. You can download from your usual provider. The third test in that fascinating series begins on Thursday. There'll be coverage in Sport Today here on the BBC World Service. Still hoping to get reaction from our Premier League commentary match where Manchester City won 3-1 at Chelsea earlier. We'll hopefully bring you that in the next few minutes. But let's turn our attention to the NFL for the foreseeable, and the final round of fixtures in the regular season have just got underway. There are 2 conference titles and several wildcard places up for grabs. The NFC East title has yet to be decided, though. Washington football team are currently top of the division, and they play the Philadelphia Eagles later. Washington head coach Ron Rivera led the Carolina Panthers to Super Bowl 50, and he says it's a big moment for his current team.
I believe I have a feel and understanding of, what these games mean, what each one, what their value is. And obviously this is about as big as it gets for us. This is the biggest game we will play this year. That's for darn sure. So I'm pretty excited about it, and we'll see how things go.
Well, I'm glad to say the Athletics' Rhiannon Walker, who covers the Washington football team, is with us live on Sports World. A happy new year to you, Rhiannon. Pretty exciting stuff this then. The NFC East, perhaps fair to say, hasn't been the most startling of divisions this year, putting it mildly. But it's fairly simple, isn't it? A win by Washington and it's done.
That is correct, and also a happy new year to you as well, too, Daleth. But yeah, that's the simplicity of it, is that Washington could have been in the playoffs, or they would have known that they were in the playoffs last week with New York losing against, let's face it, losing their game earlier in the afternoon to the Baltimore Ravens. But now the game is a win and in this week, and as such, it's been flexed to Sunday Night Football and NBC as a result of the fact that it will determine who wins the division tonight. It's interesting, if they don't win, of course, they're out of the playoffs, and the winner of the New York Giants and Dallas Cowboys game then becomes the NFC's representative in the playoffs this year. But it's Washington has the ball in their court. They hold their own destiny. All the other, terms you want to say or the expressions you want to use, they're all applicable here.
We love cliches on sports. Well, don't worry about that, Rhiannon. And just sort of explain to me, if Washington were to make the playoffs, how much of a great achievement would it be, bearing in mind the coach in particular has had to go through, medical treatment for cancer this season?
I don't think I can quantify it. I was just talking to somebody last week and running down the list of things that have happened this year with this team. Obviously, Ron Rivera was brought in and hired around this time last year. Matter of fact, it was yesterday last year that he became the new coach for the Washington football team. They bring in Jack Del Rio as the defensive coordinator. They hire the first black woman to be a full-time head coach in the NFL. They trade away Trent Williams, Quentin Dunbar. COVID hits in March, so Ron Rivera and everyone went down to Richmond for the team's final training camp in the capital of Virginia. Then we have the protests here in the United States, and I say that because it's important to remember that the NFL is 70% black, so there were a lot of players on the team who were emotionally and mentally affected by what was happening in the real world outside of their sports bubble during what would have been their OTA period, their organized training period time. Then there's the sexual harassment cases that come out. Then they bring in Jason Wright, who's the first black team president in the NFL. Ron Rivera has his cancer diagnosis. The team starts out 2-7. To say that this was unexpected, given everything that has happened with this team, is so much of an understatement, and I truly don't have the right synonym or the word to articulate exactly how unexpected this was. Not the least of which, the team was 3-13 and taking the second overall pick in last year's draft. So for them to be on the precipice of winning the NFC East a season after that with a brand new coach, truncated off season, all the various things that are happening. The owner is still dealing with entanglements with the sexual assault settlement in the form of $1.6 million, and the fights with the minority owners, the team name change. You see how the more I think about it, the more stuff comes up, the more improbable it feels. And I might even say it was more improbable than what the Nationals did back in 2019 when they won the World Series. Even though they were 19-31, the Nationals have had success. Washington has not been one of those successful teams in the nation's capital here in the States. So,
gosh,
like I said, I don't have the right words. It's amazing. And with the quarterback who nearly lost his leg, his life, and everything else in between, you can't write this stuff up in Hollywood. I tell you that right now. I don't think the brightest minds in Hollywood could come up with this script.
Wow, that just puts it in perspective. It would be, like you say, quite an incredible achievement if Washington football team make the playoffs. Rhiannon, really great to speak to you on the first Sunday Sports World show of the new year. Wishing you a new year, as I mentioned before. I'm sure we'll speak again throughout the rest of the season, the playoffs and so forth. Time, as I said, to quickly get some reaction to our Premier League game today. Manchester City were 3-1 winners at Chelsea earlier to move up to 5th in the table, and the Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola has been speaking to the BBC's Steve Wilson. He started by saying people are now starting to take their title challenge seriously.
So far, we were not content. It doesn't matter. So, like you said, the Premier League is weird for everything. Look, this is a stadium without people, and we have 9 players positive in our group. So, everything is weird. It's just to be focused during the game. The rest, the guys have to relax. Don't think much. The backroom staff prepare the games, but they have to be calm and make the effort. And I think what I said. Hopefully in the Premier League we can be the last 6, 7, 8 games being there to fight for the Premier League at the end. but I'm pretty sure our people will be so proud for the way we played today.
A very happy Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola. No Premier League football next week. We'll turn our attention to the oldest cup competition in the world, the FA Cup. We'll have commentary of Tottenham Hotspur, who visit non-league side Marine. Please join us for that one. But as for today, it's City who thrashed Chelsea.
Gundogan, a spin on the edge of the penalty area and a right foot shot into the bottom corner. De Bruyne's bullet, Foden left foot of the near post, it's 2-0, and what a neat finish that was. Still Sterling, hits the post with a shot, comes out to De Bruyne, who scores.
Sports World is a BBC Sport production for the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, and on the Inquiry this week...
There's a problem in education, and it's probably not one you expect. Around the world, from schools to universities, boys are trailing girls in their academic performance. Join me, David Grossman, as we examine what's going on and how to fix it.
The Inquiry at bbcworldservice.com/inquiry. In 60 minutes, it's Music Life.
I'm sitar player Ami Dang, joined by former member of Macaroni, Elisita Punto, electronic music artist Nazar, and connoisseur of all things experimental, Tuna Pase. We'll be discussing what we do when something isn't working.
Stay with us. The newsroom is next on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
At 19 hours GMT, this is the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Gareth Barlow. It's a new start of term in the United States as Congress reconvenes after November's presidential election.
If the senators to be sworn will now present themselves at the desk in pairs as their names are called in alphabetical order, the chair will administer their oaths of office.
A year after the killing of a top Iranian commander by the United States, we ask what the future holds for both sides. In the Central African Republic, rebels overrun a city as insecurity grips the country. Also on the programme.
This vaccine means that we can accelerate that delivery plan so we can bring this pandemic to an end faster than we previously would have been able to.
As governments roll out COVID vaccines, are countries meeting their targets and are people getting the jab? And the mega clash between a mega project and an endangered bird. We'll hear about China's ecological tussle. But first, the news.
Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. The world's biggest manufacturer of vaccines, the Serum Institute of India, says the government has barred it from exporting the Oxford AstraZeneca coronavirus jab. The vaccine is seen as the best hope for developing countries as it's relatively cheap and can be stored at a more tepid temperature than other inoculations. Charu Shahana reports.
The chief executive of the Serum Institute of India, Adar Poonawalla, said he respected the Indian government's decision because Delhi wanted to protect its own vulnerable population first. But that does raise questions about the timing of vaccination programs in other countries. Mr. Poonawalla has previously said India will get priority, with the COVAX alliance, the global initiative to provide vaccines for developing countries, coming second.
The United Nations mission in the Central African Republic says rebel forces have seized the southeastern city of Bangassou, which borders the Democratic Republic of Congo. A rebel coalition has accused the government of holding a fraudulent election. Our Africa editor Mary Harper reports.
The UN said the rebels staged a dawn raid on Bangassou and that there was fighting in several parts of the city. Many civilians have fled across the border into the DRC. There seems to be no let-up in rebel activity. On Saturday, they attacked the town of Damara, just 70 kilometres north of the capital Bangui. The authorities have accused former President François Bozizé, who supports the rebels, of trying to stage a coup. He denies this, but seems determined to further disrupt an already fragile situation.
Officials in Niger say about 100 people are now known to have died in Saturday's attacks on two villages by suspected Islamist militants. A local mayor said the jihadists swept into the area on dozens of motorbikes. The villages are near the volatile border with Mali, where militant groups are known to operate. Bosnia's security minister Selmo Cikotic has said the situation at a migrant camp in the northwest of the country is cruel and inhumane. Hundreds of people have been staying at the Lipa camp, even though fire destroyed much of the facility last month. Here's our Balkans correspondent, Guy Delaunay.
Security Minister Selmot Sikotic said he'd order the army to make the Lipa camp habitable. Troops have already set up emergency tents, but people have refused to use them because they lack heating and sanitation. Representatives from the European Union and the International Organization for Migration joined Mr Sikotic on his visit to Lipa. So did the mayor from nearby Bihać. He reiterated his opposition to reopening a reception centre there while works are carried out at Lipa. No wonder the residents chanted EU help us to the departing delegation.
Guy Delaunay reporting. You're listening to the World News from the BBC. Islamic State militants have said they were behind an attack in which at least 10 coal miners were killed in the western Pakistani province of Baluchistan. The victims were members of a minority Shia community. The Organization of American States has condemned the death in custody of a member of the indigenous Pemon community in Venezuela. Salvador Franco was arrested along with 13 others in November on suspicion of taking part in an attack on a military installation in the south of the country. A zoo in Scotland has warned that it may have to return its 2 giant pandas to China next year because of losses incurred during the coronavirus pandemic. Edinburgh Zoo spends more than $1 million a year to lease the pair from China, but needs to make savings. And Jerry Marsden, the leader of the British band Jerry and the Pacemakers, has died after a short illness. He was 78. The band shot to fame in the early 1960s and is best known for its version of the Rodgers and Hammerstein song You'll Never Walk Alone. It was adopted by fans of Liverpool Football Club as their anthem. Colin Patterson reports.
You'll Never Walk Alone, played before every Liverpool home match, and the voice singing it, Jerry Marsden. When Jerry and the Pacemakers' version of the Carousel show tune reached number 1 in 1963, it made them the first group in chart history to have a number 1 with their first 3 hits. Earlier in the year, both How Do You Do It?
How do you do what you do to me?
And I Like It.
I like it, I like it.
Had top the charts.
I love the way you run.
They helped kickstart Mersey Beat. In fact, they had a number 1 before the Beatles.
Jerry Marsden, who's died at the age of 78. That's the latest BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Gareth Barlow. It's the dawn of a new era in the US Capitol. Lawmakers elected or re-elected in November have been sworn in for a fresh term in the 117th Congress.
If the senators to be sworn will now present themselves at the desk in pairs, as their names are called in alphabetical order, the chair will administer their oaths of office.
But the formalities have taken a backseat in Washington because Donald Trump continues to refuse that he lost the election. And audio has just emerged in the last hour or so, published by the Washington Post, of a phone call between the president and officials in the state of Georgia. At one point on that call, Donald Trump is heard saying that they need to find more votes for him. Meanwhile, 11 Republican senators, led by the Texan Ted Cruz, have called for a 10-day emergency audit of the results in states where Donald Trump claims voter fraud took place. Well, one of the groups, Senator Ron Johnson, told NBC's Meet the Press that their goal was to ensure transparency.
We are not acting to thwart the democratic process. We're acting to protect it. The fact of the matter is that we have an unsustainable state of affairs in this country where we have tens of millions of people that do not view this election result as legitimate.
We're joined live from Washington by our correspondent, Lebu DeSecco. Let's start with this phone call and this audio the Washington Post has obtained. It's quite remarkable.
Honestly, Gareth, I'm shocked by how shocked I am. It is extraordinary. It's 4.5 or so minutes long, and on it you hear Donald Trump pressuring the election officials in Georgia, including the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, saying there's nothing wrong with saying you are going to have to recalculate, repeating all of these unsubstantiated claims he's made about the voting machines and alleged shredding of votes. And you hear the president saying, are you sure? Basically referring to whether they can recount, and saying, I just want to find 11,780 votes, quite specific there, and saying, again, I think you have to say you're going to re-examine it. And just listening to it, I just thought, I've covered a lot of elections. I have reported on elections across the African continent, and I just think if this had happened in any other country, let alone an African country, what would the world be saying?
He said an awful lot, and it's a big question as to what will the rest of the world make of it. Could you just give us a sense of how Donald Trump sounded on that call? Was he angry? Was he downbeat? What was his mood and tone like?
It was just very pressuring. Imagine if I said to you, Gareth, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to do that? Are you sure? It was a very persistent, consistent sort of, I need you to do this to recalculate these votes. The election officials from Georgia were very calm and just kept repeating that is not how it works, and that there is no evidence of this widespread fraud or shredding or any of the claims that were made. And you have to bear in mind as well that on Tuesday, Georgia is holding 2 Senate runoffs, the results of which will decide who controls the upper chamber of Congress, the Senate. And just on Friday, Donald Trump was claiming that the elections in Georgia are illegal and shouldn't count. And they're expecting Republicans to come out and vote for them. It is just an extraordinary situation.
And tell us about this proposed audit that these senators have put their names to. Is there any chance that will take off or even succeed?
Well, in a word, no. And the reason is because in order for any challenge to the results of the Electoral College, they are brought to the Congress, the joint session of Congress on Wednesday. In order for any challenge to stand, you need both chambers to vote for it. And I cannot imagine the Democrats who control the House of Representatives voting for a challenge to Joe Biden's win.
More fascinating events in Washington for now. Lebu Deseko, thank you.